Well, I'm really glad you're here. Otherwise, I'd have to just pitch this 13-page sermon. 13 pages, so get ready. Okay? Of course, so the words are real big, so it's okay. Recently, Renee and I took a trip. And taking a trip with us is quite an adventure in itself, okay? But we decided to help our son out. He runs a kennel, and to help him out, we went to Mud Creek Road, Wisconsin. Place up in Wisconsin on Mud Creek Road, out in the middle of nowhere. I had never been to Mud Creek Road, Wisconsin before, and I don't think anybody else in here probably has either. So she posted a little note about that. She said that in one day we went through Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas, all in one day. That tells you how fast the trip was. Having never been there, one of the interesting things that we've gotten used to in our world today is one of these. You know, you take this little thing out and you talk into it and say, I want to go to Mud Creek Road, Wisconsin. You know what this thing does? It tells you how to get there. It is so cool. In fact, you can be driving along and it tells you turn this way, turn that way. It'll even talk to you, okay, and tell you it's kind of conversational. In fact, if you're hungry, you tell this thing. And it tells you you can get food. Even to the point you can tell it what you want to eat. It's better than home. Okay. Well, no, I take it back. Oops. It's almost as good as home. Okay. You get tired at night. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. Pull over here and you can sleep. This is cool. I have to tell you, though, there was one point where me and this thing just didn't quite get along, though. We were going through Kansas City. Now, I am a little familiar, I don't really know Kansas City, but I'm a little familiar with Kansas City. And so this thing says, we go up this road to Kansas City. Sure, I'm fine. I can get there. And then when you get to Kansas City, turn here. No, that's not what you do. When you go on down that road. So me and my navigator, who was running the device, had a little discussion about, are we going to turn or are we going to go straight? We turned, okay? And I followed the instructions, and I followed my navigator, and the strangest thing happened. We got down in the middle of downtown Kansas City. I mean, if you're familiar with that area right in the heart of downtown, it's overs and unders and bys and circles. And if you aren't looking really careful, you will get in the wrong place. You know what we found? Road closed, construction, road closed, construction, road closed, construction, road. We went 65 miles an hour right through the middle of Kansas City. Slickest thing in the world. I can assure you, had I been the one giving the directions, we would not have done that. So listening to this little device really paid off. So anyways, thinking about trips got me to thinking about this morning. And, of course, Kent and the guys and some of the others are out on trips today. And you're probably praying even harder now that they will have a safe trip and get home next week, okay? But I do have something to share with him. In fact, there was somebody else that couldn't be here today, and they sent I happen to have a letter, okay? A letter from someone who wanted to share with you today a little bit. And so, is it okay if I read a little bit of this letter? That'd be okay? It's addressed to those who reside as aliens scattered throughout Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas who are chosen. You know, if I was to go up and down the street today with a letter addressed that way, to those who reside as aliens, that would be a pretty bold thing to do, wouldn't it? The word alien, it's a foreigner, someone who doesn't belong, someone who's not a citizen there. Well, now, you may not realize it, but that's a fairly rough paraphrase of 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who reside as aliens, scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who are chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father by the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to obey Jesus Christ and be sprinkled with his blood. May grace and peace be yours in fullness of measure. I didn't do this, and I had no hand in it. Pick up your welcome card, your connection card. What's the memory verse? What's your memory verse on there? I want you to know that the Spirit is very alive in this church. If you haven't felt Him, He's trying to nudge you right now, okay? Unless I'm mistaken, isn't your memory verse 1 Peter, verse 1 and 2? Yeah, I didn't do that. Kent didn't do that. That's just the way the Spirit worked it out. Thought you might enjoy that. Well, this particular passage starts off talking about Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. So I was thinking about that a little bit. We've been studying, we had our youth group, not youth group, but our growth group seminar or event or attraction or ice cream, however you want to remember it to be, here the other day. And out of our class just last week, we were talking about the word apostle. And it's a messenger. Just the root of that word is just a messenger, someone to come. Something that gives you a message, okay? Jesus took that word, though, and elevated it specifically, though, for 12 men when He created and put into them and invested in them, and they became apostles. They were with Him through His entire ministry here on earth. There were many people who did that. There were many people who followed Him from beginning to end. But there was 12 that He chose out of that. And actually, Matthias was one that was selected to follow. Peter was one of those apostles. Well, I'd like to talk about Peter for just a minute. I'd like for you to think about Peter. He was a man who lived and died a long time ago. A man that lived and died a long time ago. But because of technology, he's talking to you today. That's kind of cool to think about. Think about Peter as a tool here on earth has spoken, and he spoke Jesus' word. Just like when this thing was talking and giving me words that are coming through Google, Peter had words that came through from Jesus. You and I live in a time when things are very politically, very socially changing, very dynamic, okay? That's exactly the world that Peter was talking to. Peter was talking to the children of Israel, or God's children, not children of Israel, God's children, the church. They were scattered, dispersed, and he was wanting to tell them that there were some changes happening that they needed to know about. Much like this GPS was giving me changes, that there was roadblocks ahead and things to change. Well, now, if you look back at that list, many folks think that when he wrote the words Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, when he wrote those words, a lot of times when people read words like that, kind of like a string of names, some folks will skip over that, like it's okay, I'm just going to skip that. Well, sometimes there's some real interesting truths in those words that we miss, okay? And one of the truths that come out of these words is the idea that some folks think that what Peter was doing was giving the courier, the man that was, or the woman, or the team, whoever it was, that was going to deliver that letter to the churches, he was telling them how to go, what the route was going to be. And in that particular route is another interesting piece that kind of ties to what Peter was going to be writing about. And that's the land of Bithynia. Now, these words, these are not towns. These are regions, much like states. Okay? Much like when I read to you the states, they were large regions. Well, there was a man by the name of Pliny the Younger, and he was the governor of Bithynia. And he had an official correspondence back and forth with the emperor of that time, who was Trajan, who was the emperor. And Pliny in his correspondence was talking about the persecution that was going on in that area. And this is the first time or the most recent, earliest recorded evidence of that. And his comments back and forth read something to the fact that the persecution had trimmed the ranks of Christians in the area. So here you have a Roman governor sharing with the emperor, in essence, a report of what's going on. He says the persecution, and I'm paraphrasing this, I'm not giving the exact words, the persecution had trimmed the ranks of Christians in the area. Now, the reason that's significant is in the early years of the church, when Rome was in charge, the relationship between the Romans and the Jews was a harmonious one, okay? In the United States, we have freedom of religion. You can worship cucumbers if you want, okay? That's the way it is. In Rome, in the Roman world, there were certain sanctioned, approved religions. And being a Jew was an approved religion. So the Jews had protection in the Roman society. While it's true they didn't like it, while it's true they were oppressed and they had to pay taxes, all that was true, but still yet, the relationship between the Jew and the Romans was fairly harmonious for the most part. Well, as Christianity began to come into the world and leave Jerusalem and go out into the regions, there were times when the Roman world saw Christianity as just a Jew. You're just still of the Jewish faith. So there's even some recorded instances in Scripture where when Christians went to a Roman magistrate, they actually got favorable support. There was actually a good relationship. So the reason this is important to recognize is that at this point in time, what was changing, you remember how Paul was a Jew and he went out to kill and to murder Christians? Okay, at this point in history, what was going on was the Jews were the ones that wanted to get rid of Christianity. The Jews were trying to drive out Christianity. The world was changing. Persecution now wasn't going to be just from the Jews. Persecution was going to come from the world, from a much bigger circle. People had been oppressed from that realm, and now they were being oppressed by another realm, the world as a whole. Well, we can go a little further. So Peter writes to us as aliens in this world because he wants us to know and remember where we want to go and how we want to get there, because we're citizens of a much better place. Let's go a little further in 1 Peter, okay? Verses 3 through 5. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that's ready to be revealed at the last time. One of the songs we sang just a little while ago was Living Hope. What Peter's talking about here is that we have a new birth into a living hope. A lot of the world, when it looks at us as Christians, looks down on us, has a negative feel about us, a negative connotation when we start talking about hope and faith. In fact, there's implications. People tend to think that Christians are weak, that Christians are unstable, that Christians are even weak-minded. I even found one study that some doctorate-level individuals did, that they were proving that people who were religious, had a faith, were less intelligent than atheists. So if you want to prove it, you could. Peter, on the other hand, is going to prove something very opposite of that. Okay? Not that we're weak, that we're unstable. A Christian is a person, according to Peter here, who's been reborn, begotten again by God into a new life. When you and I come up out of the waters of baptism, when we come up out of that baptistry, there is a change. And that change is so radical that the only way to describe it is that it's a whole new life. That life got there because God begot you. You're born of God. Okay? This living hope is possible, Peter states. Click. This living hope is possible, Peter states, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. This new birth takes us from just the physical world now into realization that there is much, much more. All of us in this room have a real realization that there is more out there than just the world we live in. Okay? When you think about having this living hope, in Ephesians chapter 2, 12 through 13, it says, now this is Paul. He's writing to the church about before they were the church. He's writing to them and he's telling them something about themselves before they were the church. Remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. What Paul is saying is here, the world has no hope without God. The persecution that Peter is addressing now has become a global issue. The world doesn't want to have Christians with living hope. The world doesn't want to have Christians with living hope. You know, when I say that, I bet a lot of you are sitting there thinking, well, now wait a minute. I have some really good neighbors. I have some really good friends. We get along really good. Kansas is a good place to live, don't you? How many of you, if you were to get your phone out right now, if you do Facebook, some of you don't, I understand, but if you got your phone out and looked on your Facebook feed, you'd see hundreds, maybe some of you have 1,000 friends. Is that true? But so, I bet some of the teenagers have that many, okay? So, how can there be so much friendliness and yet the world hate us? That's what I want to explain. Look in 1 John chapter 5, verse 19. We know that we are children of God and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. You and I live in a world that has evil in it. There's sickness, death, persecution, depression, loss, anxiety, murder, lies. They just go on and on. Every one of us suffers simply because we live in this world. The one who controls this world wants me and you to live with no hope. There was a man, in fact, by the name of Socrates. He was an ancient Greek playwright, and some of his material has made it into our world today. And one of the things that he wrote, not to be born at all, that is by far the best fortune. The second best is as soon as one is born with all speed to return thither whence one has come. That's a pretty sad way to live, isn't it? To the lost, the world's a place where everything dies. To the lost, the world's a place where everything decays. To the lost, the world is a place where everything fades away. Now, there might be a pleasant moment. There might be something of beauty that we would look out on. I mean, God's creation is beautiful. We can look out and see that. But there may be a relationship we have, but those things don't last. This is the world that I'm talking about. This is the world that hates Christians. This is the world that wants us to give up. Go back to 1 Peter again, and verse 3 to 5. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy he has given us new birth into a living hope, through resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, and fade. I like inheritances, okay? I don't know of anybody that doesn't. At home, I have one inheritance that is really special to me, okay? When my mom passed, my dad was gone, and my mom passed, we shared what things were left there at the house and one thing and another, and one of the things I wanted was a cast iron skillet, okay? That, to me, is probably one of my greatest treasures here on earth, okay? It reminds me of the time when Mom and Dad sat across the table from each other, cutting potatoes and yakking, and Mom couldn't see, but she was peeling potatoes. And Dad would hand her one back and say, no, you missed a spot. Well, where's it at? He said, find it yourself. You know. Oh, he believed in getting her to do it on her own. To me, that frying pan is quite a story. That frying pan was a gift to them when they got married from Uncle Ernie. So it has quite a history behind it. And I hope someday to pass it on to somebody else. You know, an inheritance that we think of today is like that. It's something that moves from people to people. What he's talking about now is a different kind of inheritance. Inheritance that's yours, and you keep it. Think about that thought for a minute, okay? We often think when someone dies, we get an inheritance, okay? But this is a little different, okay? In fact, the word he uses for the word inheritance is even kind of neat. It's a word that connects back to the Old Testament. Throughout the Old Testament, the children of Israel were really focused on the idea of getting an inheritance. And that inheritance was to be the land of promise, the promised land. It's been talked about over and over. And to the Jews, the idea of getting into that promised land and settling there was going to be something that was going to be amazing. Well, the other day, I was reading in the book of Joshua. And in the book of Joshua, well, I need to tell you who Joshua is for just a minute. Moses was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. He was God's leader out of Egypt. And he had gotten to the point where they were right up at the Jordan River. And he didn't get to cross the Jordan River. He died before he got there. So Joshua, in essence, inherited, okay, if you want to think about it, he inherited the leadership of the children of Israel. So here they are. They've been through all that's been going on. They're right up at the edge of the riverbank, getting ready to cross the Jordan River into the promised land. It is going to be great when they get into that promised land. Land flowing with milk and honey. They've been talking about it for centuries about how cool it's going to be. You know what God tells Joshua in chapter 1? He says, be strong and very courageous. Joshua, be strong and very courageous. Joshua, be strong and very courageous. Over and over again, he says, Joshua, be strong. In one chapter, it's like in there like 3 or 4 times. And this chapter is short. So why would God tell Joshua over and over again to be strong and courageous? You open the door and you're there. The promised land was full of Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Gerasites, Amorites, and Jebusites. Now, I didn't give a detailed look at all those names. But I'm pretty sure that when Joshua went into that land, what was going to happen was they were all going to just pack up and leave, right? No. The reason God told him to be strong and courageous because when they crossed that river, it was going to be a battle. He was going to have to fight to get into that promised land. Oh, and then after he won the battle and got the promised land, for centuries, they'd be trying to take it back. He's going to have to fight over and over again. In fact, even once they got into the promised land and things went on a few centuries and they began to think about themselves and not about God, and they began to be in false gods, then they would defile the land and they would end up being driven off the land and given to somebody else. And even when they were in the land and everything was going fantastic, think about the children of Israel for a minute. They were in the land, things were going fantastic. They still had to plant crops all the time. They still had to take care of the house all the time. They still had to sweep the floors. They still had to maintain things because things wore out. Peter's got something much better for us, much better in mind. But the Christian inheritance, what he's going to do is show us that this is what they thought was a great inheritance. This is what your inheritance is as a Christian. And he uses a word that says never perish. One of the things you can do about never perish, you can take margarine out of the refrigerator, and you can set plain old, not butter, plain old margarine on the counter, and it will never perish, okay? Flies won't get in it, nobody will mess with it, and it'll sit right there, okay? That's not necessarily all that he's talking about here. The fact that something won't ever perish, well, in fact, I can tell you something that does perish, okay, but we'll get to that later, maybe. Anyways, the word that he's after here is beyond just perish. It's about ravaged. Okay, it's got a military connotation to it also. The idea that somebody could come in and ravage, take over, take what you have away from you, destroy it. Okay, and what he's saying to us as Christians, heaven, our inheritance, has never been ravaged. It will never be ravaged. There will be no evil one there. Then he says it will never spoil. It will never spoil. I worked all summer long growing a garden. Not very big, but it was a garden. And I had this awesome plant in it that was going to grow red peppers. You know, that plant came up and grew and grew and grew, and that plant got about this tall, okay? And it got this pepper on it, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and it never got red, okay? So finally, we're talking about frost and one thing and another. So the other day, I picked my red pepper that just had a little bit of red on it, but not a lot. I took my red pepper in the house, and I laid it on the counter, and thinking, okay, it will ripen up, and we'll get a red pepper. Went to eat it last night. Yeah, it went beyond red, okay? Okay. So we grew a garden with one pepper, and it didn't make it. What Peter is saying here, in our heaven, there is no spoilage. There is no tent of evil. There is no tent of destruction, okay? The children of Israel, when they were in Canaan, remember, they had, everything was going great, but when they picked stuff, when they did stuff, okay, it was like any other land. It sooner or later faded. That's not going to be that way in heaven. He says it will never fade. It's unfading. Well, then, what exactly is this inheritance that we're to be born in? I think there's a verse in Revelations that kind of emphasizes or brings it out a little bit. In Revelations 21 and verse 3, it says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" At the end of Peter's verse there, a while ago we read, he said that salvation is ready to be revealed at the last time. The inheritance for the Christian is the full joy of God. It's the idea that God is waiting for us there in heaven, and God will dwell with us. But remember, we got to get there. We got to get through the roadblocks. We got to get through the construction. First Peter. Let's go back to 1 Peter. That's the verse we're studying. And in that, he tells us how we got there. In 1 Peter, he said, verse 5, "Who are protected by the power of God through faith for salvation ready to be revealed at the last time." Every one of us in this room, every one of us on this globe is on a journey. Every one of us. We're all headed to some kind of an eternity. How we get there and where we end up has a lot to do with us. Peter stated that the Christians are protected by the power of God through faith. Now, the NIV uses the word shielded, and that's kind of close, but not as close as protected. Protected is a better term here. And this, again, goes back to a military term. I don't understand why Peter used so many military terms being a fisherman, but he did. But this term that he used is the idea that God is garrisoned, that his camp, that He is around us as Christians, watching over us. You know, even without faith, a person without faith knows that even when I can't see God, even when I can't hear God, I know God is there watching over me. The reality is God doesn't remove us from all of our troubles. God doesn't remove us from all of the pain. God doesn't remove us from all of our problems. Instead, He makes it possible for us to conquer them. So, no matter where you're at on your journey today, I want you to know that God has a GPS. There it is. I want you to know today that God has a GPS that works for you. Okay? God's personal Savior. If you're someone who today you follow God's guidance and you got it going right, you know, you're out on the road and it's smooth sailing. It's level road. God is just blessing you in ways you cannot imagine. It's downhill all the way and you got a full tank of gas. If you're in that spot right now, just simply say thank you. So just simply recognize how much He loves you and how much He's cared for you. If you're someone in the room today who's got a fantastic relationship with God, and He's decided to help you grow a little bit more. He's decided to let a few rocks get in your road. He's decided to let you see that there's a little snow or ice in the forecast. Whatever you want to imagine, okay? Then simply thank God for what He's given you. Ask your brothers and sisters to pray for you right now. Whatever we're going through here on this earth doesn't compare with what we have laid up for us in heaven. Maybe you're someone today that you haven't made that first right turn. Maybe you're someone today who's still trying to figure that out. Today's the day you can make a U-turn, okay? Today's the day that you can act on the belief that you have, repent, and start a new life. Well, Peter knew what was happening to the world in the world at that point, Christians. He knew because it was happening to him. You see, Peter was in Rome when he wrote this letter. And church tradition records for us the idea, now this is not fact, this is tradition, but church tradition has it that Nero sought out, found Peter, and crucified him. And when they were preparing to crucify Peter, he asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified like Jesus. Right after the verse we've been reading in 1 Peter, I want you to keep in mind, he knows what the world is like. Peter's going through some persecution himself. In 1 Peter chapter 1, the very next passage, verse 6, in all this you greatly rejoice. Though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Just for a minute, when you're reading this is not Peter saying it. Peter's the tool. These are Jesus' words coming through to me and you. Okay? Peter wrote them down. Technology got them to you. But this is Jesus talking to you. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus is revealed. Though you have not seen Him, you love Him. And even though you do not see Him now, you believe in Him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. We are all, as Christians, we are aliens in this world. God has a place prepared and ready for us, and He had it ready before the foundations of the world were laid. Jesus came to earth to provide a way for us to get back to God. God has provided a new birth into a living hope. And that living hope is possible because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. His death provides us with an inheritance that God has planned for us. And that inheritance has never been ravaged, it's never been destroyed by the influence of the evil one. This inheritance has never been polluted by the power of sin. This inheritance will never fade away and decay because of death. This is the cool part. God is standing there over us as Christians to protect every one of us. This salvation is ours, and it is ready. We have it now. It's going to be revealed at the last time. That's when Jesus returns, and it could be any time now. So, while we're waiting, let's just remember a couple things. The world hates us. The evil one wants to prevent us from reaching our promised land, a place that's far above anything that this earth can ever get to or beyond our imagination. The evil one is going to bring persecution, pain, and problems to God's children that have been reborn. Because of all that we have and because of all that has come, we are told as Christians to rejoice. The suffering and trials we face now will prove the genuineness of our own faith. And that's going to bring glory and honor to Jesus. We're to love him and believe him and trust that the end result will be the salvation of our souls. This would be a good time to sing an invitation song, I think. If you have a decision to make this morning, I ask you to come forward and join us. Let that be known. We'd be glad to share and pray with you in any way you would like. If you'd like to be baptized and make a choice about that, that can be done today also.